Good morning, evening, or night, wherever you are. Welcome to WHAM Today. Take a deep breath, clear your mind, and let's drift through the whispers of today's world, one quiet thought at a time. As we wrap up Wednesday, 30th July 2025, let's see what stories are unfolding around us. India faces new economic challenges as President Donald Trump announced a 25% tariff on Indian goods, effective August 1st, coupled with an unspecified penalty for purchasing Russian oil. This move is expected to impact key export sectors such as textiles, pharmaceuticals, and jewelry, potentially shaking investor confidence. Amid these developments, the Indian stock market experienced volatility, with the Nifty 50 falling to 24,642.25 and the BSE Sensex dropping to 80,605, while Gift Nifty trends indicated a gap-down start for the benchmark index. Despite market concerns, Jio Financial Services shares experienced a rise after raising €15,825 crore through warrants, reporting a quantified 26 profit of Yoga 300 and Mandat Rockeyes, and launching passive funds with BlackRock. NSDL's IPO was fully subscribed within hours, and the NSE has crossed 23 crore investor accounts. The Indian regulator is also seeking trading data from exchanges in a wider Jane Street probe, while gold demand is projected to hit a 5-year low due to record prices. Hanwha Ocean is establishing an engineering hub in India to expand offshore plant capabilities across the Pacific in the United States. President Donald Trump's announcement of tariffs on Indian goods coincides with the U.S. Federal Reserve's decision to hold rates at 4.25%. 4.5% Fed share. Jerome Powell indicated that no imminent rate cuts are planned, citing inflation risks stemming from tariff policies, which has implications for Indian stock market expectations. Meanwhile, in Japan, the central bank has maintained its short-term interest rates at 0.5% for the fourth consecutive policy meeting. China's manufacturing sector is facing headwinds from labor shortages in smaller workshops, U.S. tariffs, and a strategic pivot toward advanced manufacturing. The official Manufacturing Purchasing Managers Index, PMI, reflected this, staying below expectations at 49.3 in July, marking its fourth consecutive month of contraction. Despite manufacturing challenges, Chinese stocks have climbed to a 9-month high amid bull market optimism. NVIDIA has been summoned by the Chinese government to address potential backdoor safety concerns regarding its H20 chips. In the financial sector, Wuxi AppTech raised HK $7.70 billion, as $981 in Hong Kong through the sale of 73.8 million new shares to institutional investors, signaling growing bullish sentiment for Chinese biotech. However, Hong Kong stocks are bracing for a 2-week low as the U.S. Federal Reserve seems reluctant to cut rates, exacerbated by China's manufacturing contraction. Victory Giant Technology, Huizhou, a supplier to NVIDIA, is planning a Hong Kong share offering after regulators eased fundraising rules for high-tech firms, intending to sell up to 10% of existing capital, with options for more. ByteDance's Douyin, Chinese TikTok, is integrating its online shopping platform, Douyin Supermarket, with Douyin hourly delivery to compete in the instant commerce sector against rivals like Alibaba, JD.com, and Meituan, leveraging mapping and location services. Alibaba Group Holdings CFO Toby Xu Hong expressed confidence in China's AI sector and consumer market highlighting the company's AI investments, infrastructure, and on-demand delivery, including a 380 billion yuan $152 allocation for AI infrastructure and 50 billion yuan in subsidies. Starbucks is reportedly progressing with the sale of its China business, attracting interest from over 20 potential buyers, seeking a strategic partner to capitalize on growth opportunities while remaining committed to its presence. CEO Brian Niccol reports increased sales after a year. With over 7,800 stores, China is Starbucks' second largest market, but turnaround efforts are ongoing. Goldman Sachs projects China's geriatric healthcare industry will reach 963 billion yuan, $134 billion by 2035, driven by an aging population and an expanding middle class, with wealthy consumers expected to increase spending on post-retirement healthcare. China has cleared the fewest Hong Kong listing applications in 8 months, potentially indicating a slowdown following a period of active fundraising by local companies. Shenzhen is adjusting China's first pilot personal bankruptcy scheme. Turning to the United States, President Trump is aiming to revitalize the U.S. shipbuilding industry to counter China and create American jobs, requiring infrastructure rebuilding and workforce retraining. Mercedes-Benz and Porsche are scaling back expectations due to U.S. tariffs and a slowdown in China. Mercedes' U.S. sales fell 6% in the first half of the year. President Trump stated that trade talks with China are progressing well, expressing optimism about reaching a fair trade agreement. Finally, France has been undergoing a transformation in Paris over the past 20 years, discouraging car traffic and increasing tree planting, resulting in cleaner air and revitalized riverbanks and public spaces. Russia initially faced a massive earthquake, triggering tsunami waves that reached as far as California and Hawaii, leading to evacuation orders in Hawaii and Japan, before warnings were lifted for Kamchatka and Sakhalin. Following the earthquake, the Kamchatka volcano in Russia's far east erupted. The Kremlin maintains that Russia has become resilient to sanctions, despite mounting pressure from the US regarding the ongoing conflict in Ukraine. Trump has threatened Russia with further action, but analysts suggest a weak ruble and higher oil prices may offset the impact of potential tariffs. Russian ESPO oil premiums remain stable in China despite the threat of US tariffs. Oil prices have increased as Trump shortened Russia's deadline to end the Ukraine war. Russia has expressed concern over potential strikes on Iranian nuclear facilities. The Russian stock market, MOEX, experienced fluctuations in share prices across finance, chemicals, IT and telecommunications, metallurgy and mining, retail and consumer goods, and transportation sectors. Yandex rebounded from a loss to post Q2 profit growth, while the Russian Consumer Price Index has fallen for the second consecutive week. Aeroflot experienced flight cancellations following a claimed cyber attack by pro-Ukrainian hackers. Reports indicate that wives of Russian soldiers are being urged to have children, even if the fathers may never meet them. A 20-year-old student from Punjab died after drowning in a river near Moscow. Ancient whale skeletons have been unearthed by Russian scientists as an Arctic glacier retreats. The conflict between Ukraine and Russia continues to draw international attention, with Trump tightening the ceasefire deadline, increasing truce pressure on Russia. Russia claims to have caused 200 casualties at a Ukrainian training camp, while Kyiv investigates negligence among its own forces. Russian missiles struck a Ukrainian army training ground, resulting in at least 3 deaths. Neighboring Moldova is facing its own challenges, as its president has accused Russia of plotting an unprecedented interference campaign in the upcoming September elections. Shifting to Italy, the finance minister has voiced concerns about UniCredit's presence in Russia, citing potential sanctions risks. Rome has summoned the Russian envoy over the inclusion of the Italian president on a Russophobe list. In the realm of arts and culture, Russian director Zvyagintsev is in Istanbul, reflecting on cultural connections. A Russian soprano's case alleging national origin discrimination against the Met Opera will proceed. South Korea and the United States have finalized a trade agreement. This agreement sets South Korean tariffs at 15%, a considerable decrease from the initially proposed 25% by the USA. The news positively impacted the South Korean markets, with the Kospi and Kosdaq indices experiencing a notable rebound, and South Korean shares concluding at a 4-year peak. South Korea is also expected to invest around $3.50 billion in the U.S., which could lead to duty-free imports of U.S. products into Korea. However, some South Korean farmers have expressed their opposition, threatening protests if the South Korean leader accedes to U.S. demand. Hanwha Ocean shares saw a surge of over 16% after the trade deal was announced, marking the company's second successive session of gains. In other economic developments, LG Energy Solution in South Korea has secured a $430 billion battery supply agreement with an unnamed entity. The deal's value could change, and the contract might extend by up to 7 years. Furthermore, the ruling bloc in South Korea plans to increase corporate tax rates, effectively reversing a previous cut enacted under the Yoon administration. Simultaneously, tax authorities have initiated an investigation into HYBE, looking into allegations of stock manipulation involving Chairman Bang S.E.U. Data indicates a decrease in office vacancies across South Korea, but retail vacancies are on the rise, causing fluctuations in rental prices. Europe's economic landscape is currently a tapestry of mixed fortunes, influenced by recent earnings reports and the ripple effects of newly imposed US tariffs. The Eurozone experienced sluggish growth of just 0.1% in the second quarter of 2025, with Germany's economic contraction and the cessation of tariff-driven shipment accelerations contributing significantly. While Wall Street saw gains, the tariffs generally dampened European stock performance. A US-EU trade agreement did trigger a rally, briefly elevating European shares to a 4-month peak, but the euro weakened. Corporate earnings are under intense scrutiny as the full impact of these tariffs unfolds. Adidas shares, for instance, saw a decline following their earnings release. Overall, European shares have largely remained static as investors weigh the combined effects of earnings data and the implications of US tariffs. Japan's economic landscape presented a mixed picture as the Nikkei stock average showed initial gains before closing down slightly by 0.07%, a reaction to the Bank of Japan's decision to maintain current rates. Retail sales in June rose by 2% compared to the previous year. Despite this, Nissan, the Japanese automaker, reported a loss of 115.8 billion yen, $782, for the April-June period, though forecasts predict a return to profitability later in the year. AI developer Alt faced a setback, declaring bankruptcy following accounting irregularity. Japan's FX reserve account saw a record surplus in FY 2024. Meanwhile, trade relations saw shifts, with Japanese alcohol experiencing growth in South Korea as anti-Japan sentiment waned. Japan's trade deal with Trump follows similar agreements by allies like Japan, aimed at moderating Trump's tariff threats. South Korea is grappling with evolving trade dynamics, including a trade agreement with the Trump administration aimed at mitigating potential tariff increases, mirroring strategies adopted by allies like Japan. Demonstrations against President Trump's trade policies occurred near the American Embassy in Seoul on July 15th, reflecting public sentiment. Japanese alcohol sales are expanding rapidly in South Korea as no Japan sentiment declines. Off Russia's Kamchatka Peninsula, A significant earthquake measuring 8.8 in magnitude triggered evacuation orders across the Pacific region. The United States is actively employing tariffs as a trade policy tool, with nations reportedly accepting rates of 15 to 20% for trade engagement, and even higher tariffs on critical exports such as steel. Asian markets are displaying mixed signals as they navigate a complex economic landscape. China's recent economic data has underperformed expectations, contributing to market uncertainty. Japan's yen has strengthened after the Bank of Japan's latest policy announcement. The U.S. Federal Reserve is now less likely to cut interest rates in September, impacting investor sentiment globally. Trade talks between China and the U.S. recently ended without a finalized trade agreement, adding to ongoing trade tensions. An impending tariff deadline looms, creating further market anxieties. Shifting focus to South Korea, the nation has successfully negotiated and entered into a tariff agreement. Saudi Arabia continues its drive for economic diversification, although analysts point out the kingdom's persistent dependence on oil revenue. Despite this, the Saudi Tata all-share index saw gains, closing up by 0.84%. The International Monetary Fund, IMF, has revised Saudi Arabia's 2025 growth forecast upwards to 3.6%. The residential real estate sector is predicted to reach USD 130.8 billion by 2033, growing at a CAGR of 6.9%. Shell Finance announced profits exceeding $6.93 million for the first half of 2025. The new Neom Port Trade Corridor seeks to shorten transit times between Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and Iraq. In water management, Saudi Arabia plans to construct 1,000 rainwater harvesting dams, targeting a total annual capacity of 4 million cubic meters. The nation is making substantial investments in artificial intelligence, aspiring to become a prominent global talent center. Complementing this, Saudi meal startup Callo has secured $39 to fuel its global expansion. A sports fund supported by Saudi Arabia has also announced a new investment by PO. In legal news, Saudi Arabia is reportedly conducting a large number of executions of drug dealers as part of its campaign against Captagon. Brazil is considering Biden's request to cut import tariffs on semi-assembled electric and hybrid vehicles for 1 year. The Chamber of Foreign Trade, CAMEX, is reviewing the proposal. Global car manufacturers and regional governors are opposing the tariff reduction, citing potential job losses and damage to Brazil's industry. Previously, former U.S. President Donald Trump threatened a 50% tariff on Brazilian goods. This was believed to be tied to political actions by Brazilian officials, including those linked to President Lula. This tariff threat caused economic uncertainty and complicated matters for Brazil's central bank. The tariffs were ultimately delayed, with exceptions for orange juice and Embraer aircraft. Economically, Brazil is prioritizing its agricultural future, especially potash production. Car manufacturers are also working to influence market regulations with the Brazilian government. Lesotho faces potential economic hardship as a clothing factory nears possible closure due to impending tariff deadlines threatening the livelihoods of textile workers and industry stakeholders. Turning to South Africa, the rand is currently weakening amid a backdrop of rising stock values. In related financial news, the South African state insurer is establishing a substantial $1.10 billion reserve to mitigate potential financial repercussions stemming from recent riot-related damages. Santon continues to be a prominent economic center in the region. Meanwhile, Johannesburg residents should prepare for scheduled power interruptions affecting several suburbs. In other news, a South African film director is under investigation for allegedly misrepresenting their academic credentials by falsely claiming to possess a PhD. In contrast, a South African entrepreneur is being celebrated for their success story, having built a billion-rand company after starting as a waiter at Spur. Canada is contemplating recognizing a Palestinian state, aligning with similar considerations in France and the United Kingdom. Simultaneously, the S&P/TSX Composite witnessed a 0.62% decrease in trading activity. The Bank of Canada has elected to hold steady on interest rate adjustments given the market's current instability, creating some unease among investors. Market watchers are paying close attention to emerging trends, including which energy stocks are projected to perform best in 2025. Australia's inflation for the second quarter has hit its lowest point since March 2021. This shift brings it closer to the Reserve Bank of Australia's RBA 2%, 3% target. A future rate cut is now a distinct possibility. Simultaneously, Australian shares are predicted to fall after the Federal Reserve kept rates unchanged. Major Australian banks are also initiating large-scale refunds to 770,000 customers. The nation views its gas exports as a strategic asset, important for both domestic and allied interests. The new mandatory merger control regime in Australia is now active. In Thailand, conflicting reports have emerged regarding new trade deals. While U.S. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick announced agreements, Thai officials are awaiting confirmation of the final details. Shifting focus to Cambodia, a similar situation unfolds. U.S. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick stated that trade deals have been reached. However, Cambodian senior officials are also waiting for the final details of these agreements. The specifics of these potential trade deals with both nations remain unclear until officially confirmed by both parties. France, in collaboration with Saudi Arabia, is leading an initiative to secure United Nations backing for a two-state solution between Israel and Palestine. Shifting focus to Syria, the country's foreign minister is set to visit Moscow, marking the first official visit since President Assad's removal. Italy has summoned the Russian ambassador to voice strong disapproval of Moscow's Russophobe list, which includes President Mattarella. Turning to Ukraine, the ongoing war persists, with reports indicating that Russian forces killed Ukrainian soldiers in a recent strike amid a reported ultimatum given to Putin. In a related matter, Arab Gulf states are allegedly involved in the continuing conflict in Sudan. Turkey will begin supplying natural gas from Azerbaijan to Syria this week to support electricity generation in the war-torn country. Pakistan has announced a landmark trade agreement with the United States, coinciding with an announcement regarding oil cooperation between the two countries. Meanwhile, tariffs have cost the auto industry billions of dollars, impacting profits and potentially affecting consumers. Germany's economy contracted by 0.1% in the second quarter, signaling potential economic challenges. Greece, however, is experiencing a fiscal turnaround, generating optimism for European bonds and emerging markets. In Italy, the stock market in Milan is on the rise, fueled by the strong performance of banks, reflecting the nation's economic growth. Bulgaria's IPO growth recently raised 5.9 million euros through an IPO. Singapore's stock market is undergoing reform, with a focus on becoming more investor-centric. The Philippines anticipates a $1.70 billion boost to its retirement fund through a new initiative. In the United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia, EV Global is expanding its reproductive medicine presence through the acquisition of art fertility clinics. Cuba has leased farmland to a Vietnamese company, the first such arrangement since 1959, with the aim of revitalizing the island's struggling agricultural sector. The United Kingdom is currently experiencing protests during a tense summer period. Lastly, Switzerland experienced a minor earthquake with a magnitude of 3.1. And that's a wrap for today's news, because even headlines need a nap. Stay curious, stay kind, and let the noise fade as you find your quiet. Take care, stay awesome, and I'll see you next time on WHAM Today.